and welcome to this 2020 season opener for Capitol Report here on WCMU Public Television. I'm David Nicholas here with you for my 18th season as producer and host, and I'm pleased to welcome back Representative Roger Hauck, Republican representative for Michigan's 99th District. He is in his second term. Good to see you again.
Good to be back, David. Thanks for inviting me again.
As we sit down today, we are 2 days away from Governor Gretchen Whitmer's State of the State address,
yes.
But as our audience is joining us, that address will have taken place. And also coming up later after our time, the State of the Union address by President Donald Trump, and it's been announced that Governor Whitmer is delivering the Democrat response to the president. Now, we're not going to speculate on any of these things in the context that we're in, but it is the midpoint of the governor's first term, and the many campaign messages, fixing the roads was number one. So we begin with a question of where do we stand on the progress and funding for the roads?
We're still working on it. I'm a believer that all the money that goes to the pump needs to stay for the roads. Right now there's 6% sales tax. Not all of that goes to the road, but we'd have to backfill, like the school aid fund in that, to make sure that we can backfill that. I've heard rumors that the governor wants to do bonding. I'm not a big person of favor of bonding because if you build a building with a bond, you still have something after 30 years. I don't think the roads will last as long as the bonds are. And we're still paying off bond debt from the Engler administration and the Graham-Holt administration.
That was a big issue with a number of those that as we were still coming out of some economic challenges, suddenly we got to pay up on these now, period, with an unexpected pay date deadline to pay off a number of those. Is she, at least according to what you've heard, looking at the bonding to take care of the full amount that was sought for putting into the road fund, or would this be in combination with what at least first was proposed, that 45-cent per gallon gas tax hike? Well,
her plan was going to generate $1.9 billion a year for the roads, and I don't believe she can bond that much to take care of that amount. We'll have to see what her plan is, whether she's going to do the bonding, how much it's going to be. There's speculation of whether it's going to be 1.5, 3 billion. I've even heard 6 billion. The other bad thing I've heard about bonding, what she's going to do is the bonds are not going to run through the Act PA 51, the road thing, where my community will not see any of the road funding for that. It'll go to major trunk lines and M roads.
The roads of economic importance was what came out, at least during the first year of the administration, and this caused some concern as to, as you are indicating, where the priority was, where the spending was going to come from roads, at least initially. So that still remains on the table, is that we are not necessarily distributing this evenly?
I am going to hold off. I've heard that's what it's going to be, but out of respect for the governor's plan, I'm going to wait to see what it is. I would hope not, because you say roads of economic value. I would have to argue that the road that you go to, or a lot of the people I represent go to work in, I think that's an important road for them.
Well, a lot of the lawmakers up in the audience that we serve were saying their reaction was against that, because it seemed pretty clear, at least from all indications, that the so-called roads of economic importance were basically on that lower line, your Grand Rapids to Lansing to Detroit and those areas, and further north where much of our viewership is, we were not going to see that type of investment.
Yeah, the one thing that's disappointed me about the governor, and I've seen through her vetoes and that, is I don't know, she doesn't really care that much for the rural population, just through some of the veto things she did in that.
You mentioned those. There were a number of line item vetoes that were exercised on the budget proposal that came from the legislature last year. There has been a push to reinstate several of those, or at least there was for the fiscal year that began October 1st. What in the end were the things that were able to be put back into, to kind of catch us up as to where we are now? What things were we able to reinstate?
One of the biggest things that affected my district the most was rural road funding for the sheriffs. That was put back in there. That was one of the things that was pretty important to my district, so hopefully we can go further with that.
One other measure in particular you were introducing was a plan to restore funding for career and technical education. Where did that proposal?
That one got back in. I know there was another one where we guaranteed grants for kids going to not secondary schools, but what am I looking, like mid-Michigan and that. And we restored the funding for that. I got quite a few calls about that, because the kids are going to school and they're guaranteed this money, and then we cut it out from under them. So we did restore the funding for that.
What priorities then at this juncture, and this is again before the governor, as we sit down, has delivered the state of the state and then the forthcoming official budget proposal that she'll issue, what priorities, at least as of this moment, do you or the other members of the Republican caucus as a whole have for the budget to be worked on this year?
Well, again, it's going to be, we got to come up with a road solution. You know, the amount of money that we need on the roads is, you know, you hear a little bit from everybody else. And then, of course, again, funding for our schools and for our higher education. That's, you know, going to be my priorities.
Late last fall, you had a bill that was designed to change the state's juvenile prosecution rules. That was signed into law. What can you tell us then about the final outcome of that measure, including how it will be phased in by October of next year?
From what I've heard, we got everybody on board. We had the biggest issues we had was how we were going to fund it, right? And basically what it does is now, if you're 17 years old, we were one of only 4 states in the United States that did this, you could be tried as an adult. Now, the only way you can be tried as an adult is if the prosecutor or the judge deems that the crime that you committed was serious enough to be tried as an adult. And I think it's good. I mean, 17 years old, 18 years old, I remember when I was that young. I mean, you just don't know what's going on yet.
Is there still a question then, or any remaining questions in terms of the formalities, or as you mentioned, the funding for this?
Nope, there's no formalities. I think one of the reasons we waited a while to implement it is just we couldn't get a good grasp of just how many kids were in and out of it. So that's one of the reasons why we waited, so that we can see how many kids that were charged as an adult at 17 years old.
You and your Democratic colleague, Representative Frank Liberati, testified on an issue of so-called surprise medical bills. In the fall, a couple of bills were introduced to the House Health Policy Committee. What has happened since? Right
now, it's in the Ways and Means Committee. We're trying to get everybody on board. If no one's familiar what surprise billing is you make sure when you go in to have a procedure, everybody's in network. And you think everybody is, but all of a sudden you get a surprise bill where one of the doctors or whatever isn't in network. Like the insurance company could pay $100 for that procedure, and then you could be responsible for like $100 or $500 on top of that. But we're getting really close. It's something that needs to be done. The biggest thing is we want to take the patient out of the mix. And like I said, it's in Ways and Means, and we're trying to get everybody on board so that everybody's on board when the bill goes through.
Is there work being done in any companion to this on the Senate side, or once you finalize it, can it go to the Senate and potentially then on to the governor?
There was 4 bills going through the Senate side. I think Senator Tice, and I'm not sure who the other one was, and then there's 4 coming through the House side. I think in the Senate, they don't have Ways and Means, so it's been voted out of insurance, and it should be on the floor, but I don't know when they're going to have a House vote on it.
Voters approved recreational marijuana use for Michigan. What is the latest we know with regards to licenses to sell the products in your district, District 99, and what are we seeing statewide regarding both the potential economic impact and also concerns raised by law enforcement?
You know, I think it's kind of early to realize what the concerns are from law enforcement. I know I've been talking to my sheriff, and they've been seeing some counts of some people kind of like ODing a little bit on edibles. It seems to be people that aren't really used to marijuana. You know, they don't know how potent it is. As far as licensing going, I'm not sure if Mount Pleasant, I know Union Township opted out of it. And then Mount Pleasant, they had 2 ballot initiatives. I don't know if they've gave out any license or not. As far as economic impact, I think the sales have been fairly decent so far. As you know, this is with the ballot initiative. The ballot initiatives are written so vague that it's hard for us, because we need 2/3 of a vote in the House and the Senate, you know, to do anything with a ballot initiative, a constitutional amendment. So it's like the medical marijuana. I think it took them like 10 years to finally get everything about where it was good, and then now here we are with the recreational marijuana.
And what, if any, response or reaction have you seen amongst fellow lawmakers when, and you mentioned the medical marijuana, when we've seen that, and it was also written quite vaguely,
Yes.
and to finally get that cleaned up, have a structure in place, and then there was sort of this overlay of the recreational use, what then seems to be the balance between the two? Or if there is one.
I guess that's going to shake out. I mean, if it was me, I mean, you can grow 12 plants at home, right? I mean, just as long as they're concealed. You know, I don't know why you'd want to, go buy it, depending on where you live at. Like I said, I think it has to shake out. I think there'll be things that'll come back, and I'm sure that the Democrats and Republicans can agree that, we need to do this to try to fix the issue. But right now, I think it's still kind of shaking out.
And you mentioned the opt-out provision. Though the measure did pass, there are local communities that have opted out, saying that they don't want it sold in their local areas. You mentioned Union Township, the district that includes all of Isabella County, Western Midland County that you serve. Are there others that are still weighing that, or have put that issue potentially to come to a vote to have that same opt-out?
I know some of the townships are. For some reason, Wise Township rings a bell. I don't represent the city of Midland, but obviously a lot of my constituents go there to work. I know they opted out of it. The one thing about opting out of it, in the ballot initiative, it was very easy to have another voter referendum to force the cities to accept the issue. Yeah, I think Mount Pleasant kind of faced that when they opted out of it. Yeah.
WCMU, our station here, licensed to Central Michigan University, and there have been continuing efforts to increase both enrollment and retention here at the university, along with the statewide impact from the lost population from the recession in the early 2000s. There remains the issue of funding. You mentioned this earlier as a concern. What work is being done right now on behalf of CMU and the other 14 colleges and universities that are state funded?
We're going to try to increase funding in higher ed. There's some members of my caucus that don't really want to, fund higher ed to the upper level. What I would like to see with higher ed, being that I represent Central Michigan University, is a more balanced approach on how the funding is generated. We have the big three, Michigan, Wayne State, and Michigan State, that are the research facilities, and they get the brunt. Let's face it, they get the brunt of the funding. Now, I've stated this before, and I'm getting really close to dropping a bill where funding should be like like we do for our schools, per pupil. Like if your son goes to Central and my son goes to U of M, why should the state value one education as higher than the other one? I could never quite figure that out.
Well, as I noted, this is season 18 for me. This goes back to the administration of former President Mike Rao, the dollars following students.
Yeah.
And at one point, we had risen to the number 4 enrollment in the state, and yet the per pupil or the allocation was basically still down around the 10, 11, 12 at best rankings. Is there a day when we would see this as more of an equalizer? The infrastructure that has got it so weighted in favor of the so-called big three seems to be a very, or if you're looking to introduce a bill, is there enough cooperation or working together effort on behalf of everybody else to join in this where we might see more of a balance?
There would probably be cooperation with the 12, but not the 3. You know what I mean? But I've seen down there, get the bill out there, get people looking at it, and hopefully we can come to some kind of a compromise. But I mean, when I first got elected, it surprised me, like CMU, I think like 88%, somewhere in there, all the kids were from Michigan, right? And you always kept your tuition down, right? Shouldn't you be rewarded for that instead of penalized for that? I mean, the funding for the universities comes from the taxpayers of the state of Michigan. So I think if a university is ahead of educating more students that come from Michigan, they should get more dollars for that.
A point that potentially will be considered as we move forward. Same question then for the state's K-12 schools, and sometimes an overlooked issue is the cost of transportation. The more spread out a district becomes, and its impact on per pupil funding. What right now is the status of the funding across the board, and looking at some of those particular cost issues for some of the rural districts that are included along with City of Mount Pleasant and Philip.
I know we've increased funding every year since I've been there, and we're continuing to increase funding. The one thing about the funding, though, is you get a certain amount per pupil, right? So if you are like Wademan that I represent, they go to Chippewa Hills. That's one of the biggest school districts in the lower Michigan. And they have to use the per pupil funding to pay for their busings also. And I think we're one of the few states that don't take that into account. I mean, if you're a district like in Sterling Heights or somewhere where there's a lot of people, but your district isn't that big, and you don't have to spend that much money on busing, that's a big advantage when you get the per pupil funding.
As we look at this from the long view of 1993 and Proposal A, I've been asking this question for almost 20 years. Are we at a point where we need to look at the overall funding structure? We've seen the issues to try to bring up the bottom end of that funding to have it at least a little bit more equally weighted, the 2x proposals that have been implemented over time. What might be the action towards looking at an overall way to change this, equalize it, and again have it become more balanced across the state, whether you're talking large district, small rural district, and the like?
I know that the last two budgets that we did last term, we increased the 2X formula. So I think districts, I think we're getting like 150 extra, I think there was 22 schools when it came down like that were the upper tier schools. That's the only way they got the agreement to go through, and they were getting 100. So we're trying to increase that. I haven't really heard anything about, with the Headley, and I think it'd be a big push to try to fix it. What I've seen, and I'm not on the education committee, so I have to listen to experts that know more about it than I do. But what I've seen since I've been down there is we have too many hands in the cookie jar. We have the Senate, we have the House, we have the governor, and then we have the Board of Education, and then we have the state superintendent, right? There's been talk, and I wouldn't be opposed to this, is having the governor pick the Board of Education. Now, certainly sometimes it'd be Democrat and sometimes it would be Republican, but I mean, the Senate, the House, and then the governor, we vote on doing something, and then the Board of Education has to implement it, okay? And I've seen where they don't think what we did was valid, so they slow roll it to try to implement it. I just think there's too many, and that goes both ways. I mean, when the Republicans, sometimes, especially the way that school board is elected now, it's all in all the conventions, they tend to be a little bit far right and a little bit far left. So it goes both ways. When the Republicans control it, we try to steer it far right, and then when the Democrats control it, we try to steer it far left. And the other thing that, and I'm not advocating to change it or anything, but this is what I see, I think term limits really hurt it because you get a new group that comes in every time. Like I don't know that much about education, I might have ideas what I want to do, so you go in there and you fight for it, and you don't have the representative or senator that's been there for 15 years that says this doesn't work, we were going to try that, and this is the reason why we couldn't do it. So I think and at the end of the day, the kids are the ones that suffer the most, I think something needs to be done on that side of it.
Michigan's congressional delegation have been calling for more funding to address the PFAS contamination. Came to light first at the former Wordsmith base in Oscoda, but there have been other findings in the state. What is currently being done at the state level to look at this beyond that as it was tied to a former federal military installation? What
we're doing in the state is we're kind of leading on this. We're trying to decide what that level, parts per million or whatever, what is it acceptable? And then the other thing we did is when this first happened, all of our samples had to be sent out of state to see whether they were, to see what the levels were. We built our own lab in Michigan to set that up so that we can get a handle on that. The testing, someone told me that if you went to McDonald's and you went back to test or whatever, the stuff would be on your hands and it would give you a bad a bad reading, so it's really complicated on how you test it. But that's what we're kind of leading on it, and it's kind of brand new, and it's a concern, because I think we're going to find out. I mean, it was in everything, and I think we're going to find it in more things, and we're kind of the state's kind of leading on this issue.
There's also been a move on the part of many local governments to introduce environmental sustainability. The local governments in your district, what have they done to address this?
I think the biggest thing they're all trying to do is to get more people to recycle. I know when I was on Union Township's board, we tried to, obviously the recycling center is in Union Township. We tried to get some other satellite areas to try to do that. The other problem with recycling is nobody's taking recycling. So unfortunately, when we do recycle, the majority of it goes to the trash dump, right? So we got to figure out different ways that we can use it. I know as far as my townships, there's windmill projects coming in. And they should be, Co-Township did it last year, and then there's going to be, I think, 5 or 6 townships that are, my northern townships that are going to be having windmills, so.
The issue of other entities not taking that recycling comes as a concern. It would seem like that would be a great economic engine for the state, for companies to look at startups to get back into manufacturing based on the amount of recycled projects. Have the state made any lobbying effort to bring, knowing if this is an issue here and potentially other states, have we at least tried to get in the game to bring in manufacturers who might make more use of recycled products?
From what I understand, most of it went to China, like our plastics and cardboard did, and they stopped taking it. And I'm sure we're looking. I haven't heard of anything about looking into different areas on ways we can manufacture it, or different companies that can come in. But I know that's one of the issues is the cost of recycling it is getting expensive, and it's getting harder to do. One of the problems we have in Michigan, and I'm not advocating to change it, because there was one of my fellow reps wanting to get rid of the bottle law, and he just got, but the aluminum is worth quite a bit of money. So all the other states have better records of recycling because the aluminum is in there, so then the recyclers want to go get it, and that's one of the driving forces. But I'm not advocating to get rid of I don't want 4,000 calls tomorrow.
Exactly. Another issue we looked at in your prior programs with us is the cost savings and efficiencies at the local government level. Any more arrangements that are made to either consolidate or streamline services as a cost-saving measure when we look at local level?
Not at the local level. I'm sure they're always looking, for different ways to do that, but nothing that I've heard of that's come up on the horizon.
As you are into now this second half of your second term, then somewhat of a return, you mentioned some of the priorities in terms of funding for schools, but what would be some other priorities you would point to for so-called unfinished business that you would like to see addressed in this second half of a second term?
Well, the road, we have to do something with roads funding, right? We can't keep on bonding. We have to come up with something that's sustainable, that's there every year. That's probably one of the bigger things. And then school. I mean, I would like to figure out how we can get more money into the school system to help out the kids.
Any others that you would point to of pending bills, pending legislation? We highlighted some of those that had come at least from the fall, the latter part of the first half of the term. Is there anything else out there that is still that was introduced in the first half of the term that would still be under consideration?
There might be. When I first got down there, the hardest thing for me to realize is I can't know everything about everything down there. And basically bills get introduced to a committee, but unless they come out of that committee, I don't really look at them because they could be in that committee and die. So I haven't really heard of anything coming out. And then the other thing that I noticed different from last term is the budget just sucked all the air out of the room, that no bills, we haven't been having that many bills go through. So hopefully we're supposed to have the budget to the governor we agreed to by July 7th. So hopefully the budget process will go a lot better.
That would differ somewhat from the Snyder years when the whole process was targeted to end by June 30, so that school districts and other local entities would know by July 1. That's now a little bit more of a moving target date.
We're trying to, yeah, because the schools need to know. I mean, I was talking to my superintendents, especially, it's hard to get teachers, right? So you have to know the funding so that you can hire your teachers. Same goes for the counties, the townships. You know, that's what was nice about having the budget done that early, but we had the House and Senate, and the governor was controlled by Republicans, right? So we could work back and forth a little bit better. So now we have a little bit of a divided government, so we have to work a little bit harder. But hopefully we can do it. We owe it to the citizens of the state to do it.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time, as always, in addressing the concerns. We'll await the formal budget proposal from the governor and see where the work goes from there. As always, good to have you here.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for joining us here on Capitol Report. We've been speaking with Representative Roger Hauck, Republican, representing the 99th District in his second term. Stay tuned tonight for the live coverage of the President's State of the Union address. That includes the Democrat response given by Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer. This program will be repeated this Sunday at 5:30 and also posted to our website. Thanks to all of our crew, and join us next week. We'll welcome in State Senator Kurt Vanderwall. I'm David Nicholas. Good to have you here, and we'll talk again soon.